Alright y'all, what we got here is my daughter's 2000 Dodge Durango two-wheel drive. The top seal where the steering sector goes into the pinion had started leaking power steering fluid. This truck has almost 200,000 miles on it, so I thought that was pretty good for the stock rack and pinion. So what I'm doing here is I'm removing the boots off of the ball socket swivels from the tie rod end assemblies. In hindsight, I didn't have to do that because I ended up buying a complete rack. But this is the process, and I appreciate you guys for bearing with me through this because this is my very first kind of how-to YouTube video. So thank you so much for watching. But we get these boots off of here. You see me sliding them. They're hard to kind of get off because they're at the end where my left hand to your right is. The tie rod end assembly has a groove that kind of holds that boot on. So what you do here is you just get your good old crescent wrench and a hammer, and you hit that crescent wrench one time and it knocks that ball swivel socket loose, and you can spin it right off and it'll come off. And like I said, in hindsight, all this is pointless, but I figured I'd leave it in here to show you if you ever had to change those ball sockets out on the ends of your racks. But when you buy a rack, apparently, maybe a complete one, I didn't have the option from bumper to bumper to buy anything else other than a complete unit, and it came with the new rod end assemblies, not the tie rod ends themselves, but the shafts and the ball sockets. Here we're using a 13mm socket to get the bolt out of the steering U-joint. Pretty simple. Once you get it in the right position, a little extension on your 3/8 drive ratchet and that 13mm socket will get that bolt right out. So then what you're going to do is you're going to take your pry bar and work that steering U-joint off of the shaft coming out of the rack and pinion. Get in there just right. And then you take your hand and work it off and let it just fall naturally and hang. Here you're going to see how I held the steering wheel. I had a short bucket or pail that some hand sanitizer wipes come in. I tilted the wheel up, slid the bucket in, and then tilted it down. There's some cool slow-mo action, just toying around with iMovie. So here we got an 18mm wrench, and we're taking the pressure, that's the high pressure line, off of the rack. I thought I got it the first time, but I had to go back and loosen it some more. That is an O-ring, rubber O-ring fitting. And so you'll see later on in the video, but I want to go ahead and notate that it is vital that you replace that O-ring. It comes with the new rack, so that makes it pretty simple to do. Here we're just draining fluid out, and when if you see at the very end of the truck, you see I got my bay door cracked because I've got big fans, and that hinders me sometimes with catching fluid correctly. But here we're taking our long nose, needle nose pliers and getting the return line off. The reason it's easiest to do this is because it's really hard to get to that fitting where it's at on top of that knuckle coming out of that rack. But you just take the clamp off and pull the hose off, and now it's time to take the rack off of the truck. That is a 15/16 socket. You can use a 24mm and it'll work just fine. But you pull those two bolts out and the rack is completely free. The neat thing about it, there's that little skid plate that my left hand is holding on to. It catches the rack and it comes right off. Let some of the fluid drain out of it, and now we're off to the parts store. I usually try to clean up nasty parts just to help my parts store guys out, so that's where we're heading. And yeah, I drove one of my work trucks home and grabbed my Jeep because I'm trying to put some miles on it to work some kinks out of it. And I'm toying around with iMovie again, so here we go.
I ain't rich, but I damn sure wanna be. Working like a dog all day, ain't working
So I hope you enjoyed that. It's one of mine and my kids' favorite songs. But we're just buzzing down the highway I live on. You'll get to see a little glimpse of the town I'm from. But then the other part of this song that's very fitting to me.
They call me redneck, white trash, and blue collar.
Yep. Very, very true. So anyway, we're just driving, putting some miles on the Jeep. It's a 2001 XJ. I'm going to have it featured in some of my videos. We're going to end up building a kind of an overland type rig out of it. There's a lot of miles to be driven off-road here in Arkansas. And so that's kind of why we bought it, and we've enjoyed it so far. But here we are again, like driving through my little town. I just thought it would be neat to kind of put some of this video in for you guys to see. And here we are pulling into Crow Burlingame number 18, Auto Parts in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. And here's another little, just me playing around with iMovie. So I, once again, appreciate you guys for taking time out of your day to watch this. I'm trying to grow my brand on social media other than just Facebook and Instagram. And there's me all masked up with my Pit Viper shades on and my LSU welding cap. And we always teach good manners, and there I was holding the door for that man, and he was trying to hold it for me. But him being the elder, I told him, come on, man. And so here, I kept this in here because I wanted you to see this massive triple trailer axle low-riding, low-boy trailer that pulled in while we were in Crow Burlingame. And there's Tammy and Heath, and they're checking it out because that truck sat there at that intersection, blocking that intersection for 4 hours because they had no idea where they were, and their dispatcher did not plan their route out very well. So that's a hard 90-degree turn, and he just was not able to make it. So here we're just taking off tie rod ends and measuring and getting it roughed in, getting the nut, the stop nut screwed on, and then the tie rod end. Basically, if you get a rough measurement with your measuring tape, it's going to help your alignment guy out. I'm fortunate enough to have a old school hand alignment machine, and so we're able to, if it's just toe, which is all that the steering affects, we're able to do it in-house. So here I'm just taking the time to get an accurate measurement. Turns out in the end, after we put the rack on and got the tires put back on, I was 1/8 of an inch out of toe, and was able to get it within spec pretty quick. So we're just tightening that up. A crescent wrench and a bigger crescent wrench is all I use there. I was trying to think of the socket size, but anyway, now we're putting it all back together. As you can see, we got a complete rack because the only thing I had to put on the new rack was my tie rod ends, and we're putting the bolts back in here. Pretty simple procedure. Get them all tightened up, a couple ugga-duggas, and everything will be just fine. And this is what I talk about, that O-ring. Just dipped it in some of that power steering fluid that had drained out and got it nice and lubricated. And now we're going to put it back in. And as you can see, once I remove my hand, you see kind of the stub of the other fitting. It's easy to get off once you get the rack out, and then you can put it on your new rack before you put it back in. So we're just getting that tightened up, and a good range of tightness here. I know there's a torque spec on everything, but snug is pretty good. And then just kind of about 1/4 of a turn, get that O-ring good and seated, because that's all you're doing to seal that. And then we're putting the return hose and the clamp back on, and now the steering joint goes back in. And as long as now I edited this, but I did have to move the rack or the steering wheel just a touch to get it lined up because the rack was just off a little bit from what my factory one was. So we're just tightening up that bolt again with a 13mm socket. And now we're getting ready to put the tie rod ends on. Give that a good spin because the tie rod end goes up. And we're putting the nut back on. Tighten that up with a 19mm socket. And to note, I realized that I should have done a kind of disassembly of taking the tire off, but I figure everybody knows how to get a tire off if you're getting this in depth into mechanicals. But the reverse order to that, how I take tie rod ends off, is back the nut off a little bit, and then I smack that spindle with a hammer. Pops that tie rod end right out, and there you see I'm putting the cotter pin in because that is muy importante. And aside from getting the other side done and putting the wheel on, that's all she wrote, folks. Thanks so much for watching. Alright guys, once again, that was a rack and pinion install on a 2000 Dodge Durango 2-wheel drive. Probably worked for any Durango Dakota that's 2-wheel drive, probably anywhere between 98 and 01, 02. But you see, this is iPad, and got iMovie going, and that's what I did all the editing for this video in. I really appreciate you watching. Like I said, on the Self-Built channel, this is the very first how-to video that I've ever done, so it can only get better from here. But like I said, once again, it was a lot of fun doing, toying around with the editing that iMovie has, and I know there's a lot better stuff out there, and I'll get there. It's just a start. I've been doing metal fabrication and welding for so long, and I've always toyed with stuff like this. Having an Instagram account, it's part of it, but it's just it's the evolution, I think, of what this whole self-built thing is going to be. So once again, trying to keep it around a minute. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch y'all next episode.